In Revelation 19, I had a great amount of difficulty figuring out where this chapter fit. The first half of this chapter seemed to be a cheer for the fall of the prostitute, which seemingly would follow chapter 17. However, the last half of the chapter was very different and mentioned two things that I'd seen before. The first clue to this allegory was the heavenly warrior. Remember that in chapter 12, the author seems to be alluding to the Hercules constellation as the archangel Michael, who throws down the Hydra. But the white horse was referring to chapter 6 and seemed to be alluding to Jupiter. After quite a lot of brain-exploding thought, I finally came to the conclusion that chapter 19 could very well be an extension of the earlier author. It seemingly had to follow chapter 17, but again, chapters 14, 15, 16, and 18 seemed to be a completely different author. Pulling up my star chart from the 71 eclipse, I really wasn't sure that I'd find anything at all. However, I was thoroughly surprised. This is a star chart for Athens at 4:30 a.m. on the night after the eclipse. This was the smoking gun that I'd been looking for. Throughout this night, the Hercules constellation, also known as the Archangel Michael, rides Jupiter, the white horse, across the sky. I cannot begin to explain the amount of joy I have gained by finding this reference. Later writers add in allusions to Jesus as the heavenly warrior. However, it is seemingly clear that this section was ripped out of an earlier version depicted by author number 1. The possibility that I would actually find Hercules riding Jupiter before and after the eclipse of 71 is ridiculously slim. The original author is referring to the Hercules constellation riding Jupiter across the sky before and after the eclipse of 71. Later authors add in Christian theology, which simply did not exist in the first author. It appears at this point that author number 1 is thoroughly Jewish and has no ties to Christianity, but when combined with the chapter 12 eclipse, chapter 19 ends up being very strong evidence for later manipulation of this text. Someone added Jesus to an astrological understanding, but the original text is much older than the previous chapter. The last verses of this chapter seem to be an allusion of the 79 Vesuvius eruption and the death of Titus in 81 CE, which would be a logical apocalyptic view of events. So most of the last half of chapter 19 ends up being an extension of chapter 12 and the eclipse of 71. It was probably written after Titus died in 81 CE. The first half of this chapter was probably written by a Christian author, and it is likely referring to the period after 192 CE when Commodus died. The last king, or the 10th horn, as depicted by chapters 13 and 17, was Commodus. The Christian author is cheering the death of Commodus and the years of chaos that follow. The Christian author is also claiming that Jesus caused the Antonine Plague, which is kind of weird if you think about it. Thanks to the connection with the 71 eclipse, I can however say, with a high level of certainty, that a good portion of this chapter is from the earliest author. I can also say with a high level of certainty that chapter 19 was manipulated about a century later. The final author that adds to this chapter probably came later than 192 CE.